Grandpa finds hidden room in son's house. Then he breaks down in tears. While helping his son with some home repairs, Grandpa Joe stumbled upon a hidden room, cleverly concealed behind a false wall. His discovery of this secret space filled him with dread and confusion, leading him to a horrifying secret that he never expected to uncover. But before we start, smash the like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our upcoming stories. Joe sighed as he set down his toolbox, his back aching from age and years of hard labor. He glanced at his son, Mark, who was struggling with a stubborn nail. "Let me help you with that," Joe offered, taking the hammer from Mark's hand. As Joe hammered away, he noticed something odd about the wall. The sound was different, hollow. Joe tapped around the area, testing and listening closely to determine the different sounds between one part of the wall and the other. With cautious determination, Joe began to pry at the edges of the wall. He noticed that Mark was looking around nervously, pacing back and forth behind him. He paused his work on the wall and turned to his son, Mark. "Everything all right, son?" "Yeah, Dad," Mark sighed, finally meeting Joe's eyes. Joe looked at his son with narrowed eyes, trying to read his expression. "Who knows, maybe we'll find a treasure," Joe exclaimed, trying to make light of the situation that brought a sudden tense atmosphere into the room. Joe's heart raced as he pushed it open, revealing a dark, musty room. Dust motes in the air had both Joe and Mark sneezing several times before they settled. They turned back to the hidden door and pushed it open a little further. Mark shone a flashlight into the space, illuminating old furniture and dusty boxes. "What is this place?" he murmured. Joe felt a chill run down his spine. They found old clothes, books, and personal items, all covered in a thick layer of dust. An entire wall was covered in eerie doll faces, and on the other side of the room, a life-sized woman doll stared Joe straight in the eyes. Some items were covered in dust, but more and more Joe noticed things that looked recently used. He glanced at Mark, wondering if his son sensed the same dread. Joe continued to walk through the room, his curiosity peaking as he found items that looked shockingly new among the dust-coated relics. His heart hammered a bit faster. He paused to pick up a shiny, modern watch lying atop an old dresser. It seemed wholly out of place, its sleek design clashing with the antiquated surroundings. It clearly belonged to someone who might still be looking for it. Next, Joe's fingers brushed against a new-looking wallet. He opened it cautiously and found several crisp bills and a driver's license. The room's secrets deepened, suggesting stories far more sinister than mere forgotten belongings. Nearby, a laptop sat closed on a small table, its surface free of dust. The room felt like a stage set for a play that spanned decades, each item contradicting the aged atmosphere of the hidden room. Joe's mind raced as he moved deeper into the room. His suspicions about Mark, mingled with the incongruous items, began to paint a troubling picture. He needed answers, but each discovery only led to more questions about what his son was hiding. Joe noticed a pristine handbag tucked into the far corner, starkly contrasting with the dust-laden shelves around it. Its leather glistened under the flashlight's beam, untouched and oddly out of place in this forgotten room. Determined to uncover the truth, Joe walked towards the handbag, his heart pounding in his chest. Just as Joe reached for the handbag, Mark's voice cut through the silence. "Dad, we shouldn't." His voice was tense, urgent. Joe turned to face Mark, his voice stern. "Why not? Do you know something about this room?" He stepped closer, the handbag momentarily forgotten. Mark dodged Joe's questions, his answers vague and evasive. "It's just old stuff, Dad. Let's just forget about it," he exclaimed, gesturing broadly at the room. Joe's suspicion about the hidden room only deepened with every non-answer, his resolve hardening. He knew he couldn't let this go, not when the clues were adding up to something more. In the heat of the argument, Joe grabbed the handbag, his eyes widening with immediate recognition. The room seemed to spin slightly as he held it, the weight of his discovery settling in his hands. He stared at it, memories and images flooding back, linking the handbag to faces and places. The handbag belonged to a local woman who had been missing for 3 months. A chill ran down his spine, and the air in the room felt suddenly colder. The implications of finding this handbag here in this hidden room were too big to ignore. Mark's expression flickered from shock to feigned nonchalance. "What's that?" he asked, his voice a little too casual, the disconnect between his son's tone and the seriousness of their situation striking him forcefully. Joe, caught off guard by Mark's behavior, struggled to process the implications of his discovery. He held the handbag up slightly, an unspoken accusation hanging in the air between. Joe pretended not to recognize the handbag, forcing a laugh as he nudged Mark playfully. "Imagine finding treasure here, huh?" Tension seemed to lift slightly, but Joe felt a knot in his stomach as he played along. They continued with the home repairs, replacing old fixtures and patching up cracks. The image of the handbag and its implications lingered in his thoughts, distracting him from the task at hand. Before leaving, Joe discreetly snatched the handbag when Mark was busy in another room. He slipped it into his own bag, his hands steady but his conscience in turmoil. As he zipped up his bag, he glanced around to make sure Mark hadn't seen him. The weight of the handbag felt heavy with secrets as he prepared to leave. Joe said an awkward goodbye, his voice strained as he hugged Mark. Driving off, he felt a mix of relief and dread. He didn't get far before pulling over, needing a moment to gather his thoughts. Parked under the shade of an old oak tree, he sat staring at the steering wheel, his mind racing with what to do next. He pulled the handbag out, examining it closely to confirm his worst fears. The contents were minimal, but telling a few personal items and a receipt that he recognized from a local store. It was dated just days before the woman had gone missing. Joe's hands trembled as he held the evidence, the reality of the situation sinking in deeper. Joe examined the handbag closely, his heart sinking as he recognized it as belonging to the missing woman. The realization that Mark had this handbag in his home overwhelmed Joe. He sat down heavily beside his parked car, tears streaming down his face. After crying, Joe, unsure of what to do, drove home in a daze. The familiar streets blurred past him as his mind struggled to process everything. At home, Joe placed the handbag on the kitchen table and looked it over again. He turned the bag over in his hands, each examination deepening the mystery and his dread. Joe pulled up police reports on the missing woman, hoping he was mistaken. The description of her last seen items, especially the handbag, matched too closely. He sighed, a mix of fear and determination setting in as he prepared to compare further. Comparing the handbag to the police report, Joe found undeniable similarities. The color, size, and distinctive markings matched perfectly with the description given for the missing woman's belongings. As he laid the report next to the handbag on the table, the sinking feeling in his gut grew. He couldn't deny the evidence in front of him, no matter how much he wanted to. Deciding to gather more information, Joe planned to investigate further the next day. He made a list of places to visit and people to talk to, hoping to piece together more of the story before making any decisions. The list included a revisit to the hidden room, a talk with Mark's neighbors, and a visit to the local library for newspaper archives. That night, Joe fell into a fitful sleep, tormented by the day's discoveries. He tossed and turned, his dreams haunted by shadowy figures and whispered secrets. The image of the handbag and the missing woman's face melded in his mind, blurring the lines between nightmare and reality. Exhausted yet resolved, Joe woke up determined to get to the bottom of the situation. He got out of bed earlier than usual, the weight of the unresolved mystery spurring him into action. After a quick breakfast, he set up his laptop on the dining table, ready to delve deeper into the case. He researched the missing woman extensively, piecing together a timeline of her disappearance. The timelines matched perfectly, increasing Joe's dread. The last sighting of the missing woman was just a day before Joe had first helped Mark with house repairs. He stared at the matching dates, his heart heavy. He decided to visit Mark under the guise of helping with repairs, hoping to gather more information. Joe called Mark, feigning a casual tone, and offered to come over and finish some of the unfinished tasks from last time. Mark agreed, unaware of Joe's true intentions. This would be Joe's chance to look for more clues and hopefully understand what was really going on. Joe asked Mark subtle questions about the missing woman over coffee, keeping his tone light and conversational. "I heard anything about that woman who went missing?" he inquired casually, watching Mark closely. Mark shrugged, sipping his coffee, his eyes darting away too quickly. "Not really, just what's on the news," he replied, his voice a bit too nonchalant. "We should get back to fixing that leak," he suggested, setting his coffee cup down a little too hastily. Joe, sensing an opportunity, waited for Mark to step out to answer a call. He heard Mark's muffled voice through the walls, talking rapidly. Joe set down his coffee, his heart rate picking up as he stood, making his way toward the area of the house where the hidden room was located. Joe touched the wall, disbelief and frustration washing over him. Mark had covered it up, effectively erasing any immediate chance of further investigation. Mark returned before Joe could investigate further, forcing Joe to pretend to work on another repair. "Just fixing something I noticed earlier," Joe replied, masking his frustration with a focused look on his task. Going back home, he tried to distract himself by flipping through TV channels but was drawn to a news segment about the missing woman, Vanessa. He sat down heavily on the couch, the remote slipping from his hand as he watched, transfixed by the details that mirrored too closely what he had found. Seeing Vanessa's mother pleading for help on the news, Joe knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. Joe's eyes moistened as he listened to her describe Vanessa's bright smile and kind heart, knowing he might hold the key to easing her pain. Joe called the police, asking to speak with the detective handling Vanessa's case. "It's about Vanessa," he managed to say, gripping the phone tightly as he braced for the questions that would follow. The police promised to visit Joe the next day, leaving him anxious but resolute. The next morning, Detective Johnson arrived at Joe's house, stepping out of a sleek police car parked in front of the neat, trimmed lawn. The detective's solemn expression matched the gravity of the situation as he greeted Joe with a firm nod. Joe invited the detective in, offering him a cup of coffee. The casual act of serving coffee juxtaposed sharply with the tension of the impending conversation. He explained finding the hidden room and the handbag, showing it to the detective. Joe laid the handbag on the table between them, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Well, I found this hidden behind a wall at my son's house," Joe said, watching the detective's reaction closely. And the detective inspected the handbag. Detective Johnson confirmed the handbag belonged to Vanessa. "This is indeed Vanessa's handbag. We've been looking for any sign of her belongings," the detective explained. "We need to bring your son in for questioning," he concluded, looking Joe in the eyes. The detective placed a comforting hand on Joe's shoulder, offering a silent show of support in the difficult moment. Detective Johnson and officers swarmed Mark's house early in the morning, moving quickly to arrest him. Joe watched, pained but certain he had done the right thing. His arms folded tightly across his chest as Mark was led to a police car. But they reopened the hidden room, breaking down the freshly plastered wall that Joe had discovered earlier. Side officers found more of Vanessa's items, including her clothes and some personal documents. Hours later, Vanessa emerged from a hidden passage behind the room. Vanessa revealed she had been hiding from a toxic situation, and Mark had provided a safe haven. He offered this place to hide until things cooled down. She explained to the stunned officers and a relieved Joe, who listened intently, his earlier fears alleviating somewhat. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you never miss another unbelievable tale like this one.